Hello, my name is Claudia Padovani. I work at the University of Padova, and this morning with my friend and colleague Lorenza Perini, we're going to introduce you to the theme Gender Equality, an answer to crisis. There's a question mark there. You've been discussing over the past few weeks a number of issues that relate to the institutional, the economic, and the socio-cultural aspects of the crisis that has characterized Europe over the past few years. Today we're introducing you to a different theme, which we understand as very crucial, not only to understand the crisis, but to think in terms of future developments and overcoming the crisis itself. We shall be speaking about the gender dimension, the different impacts that the crisis has had on men and women, on gender equality policies, on discrimination and different practices in Europe. The presentation we have this morning is divided in different parts. We shall introduce you to some of the crucial concepts on gender, gender equality, gender mainstreaming. We shall then address some of the issues that relate particularly to the crisis. What does the crisis, economic, financial, but also social and cultural means to men and women? And we shall then address two case studies, which we think are particularly important, not only to see what the crisis has meant to the European population, but how we should be responding to some of the recommendations that have been made by European institutions. And the two case studies we shall address are gender and science and gender and the media. Finally, we have some concluding remarks, but please keep in mind the PowerPoint presentation is much longer than the one we shall present, so you can have access to the presentation visiting the website, the Next Generation Global Studies website, and there you can have access to the entire presentation and the notes for the lecture.
Hi, my name is Lorenza Perini. I'm from the University of Padova. In this part of the lesson, let's talk about some concept construction on gender equality. We will start with some definition. Gender equality is the measurable equal representation of women and men. Gender equality does not imply that women and men are the same, but that they have equal value and should be accorded equal treatment. The United Nations regard gender equality as a human right. It points out that empowering women is also an indispensable tool for advancing development and reducing poverty. The importance of gender equality is highlighted by the inclusion as one of the 8 Millennium Development Goals that serve as a framework for halving poverty and improving lives as agreed upon by the international community. Going on with definition, let's talk about gender. Gender is not sex. Gender refers to the social construction of women and men, of femininity and masculinity, which varies in time and places and between cultures. It departs from the notion of sex as a signal that biology or anatomy is not a destiny. Gender and sex are terms that are often used interchangeably, but they are conceptually distinctive. Another definition, equal opportunity. Equal opportunity indicates the absence of barriers to the economic, political, and social participation on the grounds of sex. Such barriers are often not clear and direct. They're difficult to discern, and they are caused by structural phenomena and social representation that have proved particularly resistant to change. Another important definition is gender mainstreaming. Gender mainstreaming is the systematic integration of the respective situation, priority, and needs of women and men in all mainstream policies, with a view to promoting equality between women and men. Let's watch a little video clip on how wrong images and stereotypes on the role of women and men in society will influence our daily life.
As we've heard, gender differences, they're very much part of our daily lives. But in spite of this, what we know is that in the long term of the crisis, not much of the public debate has actually reflected on the gendered implication of the crisis. Most of the public discourse, most of the media discourse have not addressed specifically some of the issues that we are concerned with. And therefore, my colleague Giovanna Vertova, as you can see in the slide, mentioned the fact that in spite of the growing debate over the causes of the crisis, less attention is paid to the material impact and very little on the gender considerations. Nevertheless, we know that over the past few years, a number of reports and studies and investigations have been produced by European institutions such as the European Parliament and the Commission, as well as by other international organizations, including the European Women's Lobby and Oxfam International. And most of what they've done, they've been looking at the implication not only of the crisis on men and women, but also on the implication and the impact on the very policies for gender equality and how that has changed in the regional context of Europe over the years. So what these different studies and analyses are telling us is that the crisis, which was named from the very beginning as a male-dominated crisis, in the long term and with the continuation of the recession, is actually affecting women possibly more than men. At the beginning, men, of course, were hit because of the structure of their employment and therefore the fact that the sectors mostly affected by the crisis, such as construction, manufacturing, the industrial sector, they see more men employed. Of course, that had a great impact on men. But as the crisis continued, what we have seen was particularly that public expenditure has become one of the aspects on which different governments and the European Union itself has decided to cut in order to adopt anti-crisis measures. And as we know very well, women are much more affected by cuts in the public expenditure in two ways, partly because they are in a large extent employed in the sector, and on the other side because they are the main beneficiaries of the kind of services such as health and education which is provided by the public sector. So as a result, what we see is that sectorial segregation emerges as a crucial challenge in finding solutions to the crisis. And at the same time, what has been noticed by these analyses is that some of the progress that had been made in terms of reaching elements of gender equality, reduction of gender pay gaps, progress that had been made before the crisis, with the crisis, they seem to actually be reducing, challenged, and even eroded. And at the same time, on the one side, stereotypes which are forcing women in narrow roles, both in the public and in the private sector, they are becoming again visible and very diffused, particularly through the media. So women somehow being pushed back to very traditional, conventional roles. And at the same time, we also see that violence is raising, and particularly domestic violence, as a result and an outcome of the pressure which is put on families by the recession. Particularly, the recession has also affected migrant women, as we can hear from this testimony, which was provided on the occasion of a meeting organized by the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee of the European Parliament.
Most migrant women who initially came with work permit and have by the time secured long-term residency are now out of labor force as businesses have closed down or because of the competition with other EU citizens. Migrants are exposed to exploitation, mainly in small businesses where they are offered very basic wages. Eastern European as well as migrant women have been the most concerned. High competition in the labor market has created more racist incidents that has been affecting mostly migrant women in their local areas. Bringing up children has become a big challenge, especially for migrant women who are own parents, as they have been left with reduced cash and lack of support from a large family.
As for the general impact of the crisis, as you can see from the slide, Since 2008, the industrial output in Europe has diminished of 10.8%, and the construction sector in particular has shrank of 20%. Private investments have gone down, and of course the labor market has been mostly impacted. What we know is that today the average unemployment rate is above 12%, and that means that almost 26 million Europeans are actually looking for jobs today. But as we look at the picture, we should also consider the fact that workforce is very different still. Men and women, they do not occupy the labor market in the same manner, as women account for 62.3% across Europe, while men account for 75%. And this is the reason why Europe, in its 2020 strategy, has identified workforce for women at 75% as one of the major goals. But how is the crisis impacting on this kind of potential? And if you look at the slide here, what you see is that basically the structure of the labor market is still very, very diversified between men and women. As you see, men, they're mostly occupied in construction, in transportation, even in ICTs, whereas women, they're mostly employed in health services, social services, and education, which, as we were saying before, they mostly relate to the public sector. Now, some detailed analyses have been produced, and I'm here referring to a study which I also propose to you as part of the further resources for reading that you can find at the end of the presentation. This one was done on behalf of the European Commission by the Fondazione Brodolini in 2012, and it focuses on the impact of the economic and financial crisis on men and women and on equality policies. Now, there's basically 4 trends that we can see, and we know that this is still going on. This is work in progress, so we cannot say this is a fixed time and we can actually start from here and adopt new policies. Basically, what we need to keep in mind is that trends and evolution, they're still moving on. So it's a moving target, as we say. But things to be remembered is certainly there have been a leveling down on gender gaps over the years, in terms of unemployment, wages, and poverty over the crisis. Certainly, this was not because of a progress of any kind, but it was actually because all rates of employment have been undermined and become lower. So overall, the condition for men has become more similar to the kind of unequal condition that affected women before. A second point is that the labor market behavior of women over the crisis has been similar to that of men. So traditionally, what was considered was that women would act as economic buffer in the labor market. So on the occasion of a crisis, if the labor market demand was growing up, then women would be more employed, and then they would leave the employment when the demand was shrinking. This has not been the case. Men and women have been affected similarly as far as raising levels of unemployment. Those who have operated as economic buffers have been mostly the young people, both men and women. Temporary workers, part-time workers, they have all gone up. A third element to consider is the fact that there is a strong threat that fiscal consolidation, as we said, may ultimately reduce both the welfare provision being made and related employment. As we were saying before, women are not only mostly employed in the public sector, but they are the main beneficiaries of the kind of services, health services, care services, and education. And finally, something that is of great concern is the fact that the very European recovery plan does not include any term like women, like gender, like equality. And in most cases, even anti-crisis policies that have been adopted at the national level, they do not really include any gender-specific measure. So what we see is that there's a lack of awareness of the relevance of including the gender dimension in the definition of any kind of solution for the crisis. As we have said, there are so many aspects related to the gender dimension when we are to look into how to address this crisis. And one interesting way of summarizing this is maybe this little image that we have here on the screen. What we're seeing here is basically the different percentage of men and women implied in decision-making position, leadership position, what is the difference in average salary, employment rates, and how many women are part-time workers in relation to men. This is just providing a very brief overview, and of course each of these aspects should be dealt with in much depth. If we go back to the presentation, to conclude this, what we have is that analysis and reports, they're not only saying what the crisis is doing across Europe, they're also suggesting the idea that precisely because of critical time, we might be witnessing some change, or opportunities for change may be available to rethink policies, but also to transform existing power relations.
Those who are affected by finance should have an entitlement to be included in the decision-making on finance. That means that women should be represented in the decision-making on economic and financial matters, both in private business, because it is not really private matter, it is really a public matter. We have choices in the way in which we pursue economic growth, and those choices are also gendered, although perhaps less obviously than in some other instances.
And what we do have is a number of suggestions and recommendations that have been made, particularly in relation to how to integrate gender mainstreaming and mainstreaming in the policies that are adopted, including revising and refining gender indicators, which, as Lorenza was saying, are so very important in order to have the evidence and the numbers that we need and the knowledge that we need to understand realities. Of particular importance is also the gender mainstreaming when it comes to anti-crisis measures. As we say, there have been a lack of attention in this case. It is very crucial that any measure which is being adopted now by policymakers does include a gender dimension in a proper and very informed way. Part of the recommendation include monitoring the risk of fiscal consolidation, boosting female entrepreneurship, and increasing surveillance on the redress and reduction of women's basic rights which are being affected by the crisis. There are two sets of recommendations which are particularly relevant to us and have been addressed by these different reports, suggesting that on the one side we should be addressing the sectorial segregation in the labor market, and a particular focus has been on stimulating women's vocation in sectors which are not traditionally part of their labor intervention and activity, such as ICTs, transportation, and science and research. So one of the case studies will actually focus on the nexus between gender and science. And the second recommendation relates to the relevance of having more women in decision-making position, both in the design of policies and programs and decision-making positions in company boards. In this case, we do have evidence from a recent study that was conducted at the European level last year, which is telling us what is the situation that we're starting from in the sector of the media.
So let's talk about the first of our case study, which is gender and science. In the European Union, while men and women access to science in schools and university has improved immeasurably, the same cannot be said for women access to scientific careers. Women account today for almost 60% of university degrees in Europe, and they achieve excellent grade, better on average than their male counterparts. However, their presence at the top of scientific and academic careers is scarce. Only 18% of full professors in Europe are women. 13% of head of higher education institution, and 22% of board members in research decision-making. Women's skill, knowledge, and qualification are grossly underused in the labor market. Going on in this frame, which is focus on the underrepresentation of women in science and technology, we can see that under 30% of physicists, engineers, and computer scientists in the world's knowledge-based economy are women. Only about 12% of science decision-making positions in university and the private sector in the world's knowledge-based economy are held by women. Why Europe needs more women in science and technology? Women remain a minority in scientific research, accounting for 33% of researchers in the European Union in 2009. In 2006, it was 30%. Although the proportion of female researchers varies considerably between countries, there is a clear pattern of female underrepresentation everywhere. From the Treaty of Rome in 1957 and the European Union strategies to 2010-2015, a lot of projects and researches have been made in order to highlight this underrepresentation of women in almost every field of science and technology. Now we know a lot of things on this issue, and most of all, we have numbers. We have data, and we can compare situation, countries, and almost everything on this subject. With statistics disaggregated by gender, we can build indicators and indexes, which are instruments of knowledge for us. Thanks to numbers, we have discovered gender pay gap. A lot of gender discrimination in labor market that were hidden before. The phenomenon of gender violence, especially domestic violence. So number counts, but problems still persist. Despite growing recognition, problems still persist. Discrimination and underrepresentation of women in science and research is a salient problem, not only in the European Union, but all over the world. There is a general problem of wasting talent in global recession. Europe cannot afford this anymore. Europe in crisis needs to get the best out of its research and innovation system. Promoting gender equality in research increases the international competitiveness and research workforce in general. We can synthesize the 3 steps of European Union strategies in this way. At the beginning, in the 90s, European Union concentrated its effort in fixing the women. Strategies to increase the number of women choosing science as a field of study and decision-making. Stressing on the neutrality of science can play a big role in finding new strategies, new ideas, new interesting solutions. Then European Union go on fixing the institution. Make institution aware of the importance of considering gender as a resource. Changing the structure of the institution in order to become women-friendly, with best practices. Implementing best practices. Now, in the year 2000, the strategy has shifted to fixing the knowledge, making people aware that gender is a positive and useful social construction and doesn't mean for women, but is for all, because it enables everybody to see things differently from another point of view. So, as what we have already said, we know a lot of things, and the European Union knows a lot of things about the situation of the single countries. But knowing things is not enough. It's just 50% of the piece. The rest is communicating what you have known. Even when you know, communicate can be the hardest part of your work. And even the European Union sometimes fails in indicating a clear strategy. So let's see 2 little video clips illustrating this different way of communicating, a wrong way and a good way in communicating science. taken down almost as soon as it was put up. The response to this video shows that the topic of women in science is still attracting a high level of interest, which is a good thing, although in this case for all the wrong reason. Selling science with sex only fits into the continuing media-focused hypersexualization of our society, and especially of our young women, something we really don't need anymore. So let's see the second video, which is a good way of conveying the message of women in science.
To get a position so that I can do research. That was not that easy. I was told the best thing for women is to get married by my supervisor.
I gave a lecture at a conference recently in the Netherlands, and I was the only woman speaker in 2 whole days, and that was quite a shock to me.
It is still harder to be a woman in science than a man. Women in science have to accomplish more to get the same amount of credibility.
They're often not thought of first for a role. They're not promoted at the same level, and it does make it very hard.
Science is very difficult. You're always confronted by the fact you don't understand things. And so it's easy to lose confidence in that endeavor.
Confidence is not the thing you create yourself. Confidence is given to you from your friends, from your supervisors, or role models, or mentors.
So what I would tell them is that we've all felt that, right? That makes you a better scientist.
One of the biggest problems for women in science is knowing what is it about and whether it's something they can do.
If there aren't many role models, they may not have a target. I want to be like that.
Encouraging women, encouraging girls to participate. Because if they do participate in development of science and technology, invariably, it means development of a nation.
L'Oréal UNESCO Women in Science Awards help put women scientists' research on the world stage and motivates younger women to become scientists.
And bringing more people usually changes the attitude.
We have to help at certain period time to start in family.
El tiempo en el que uno obtiene plazas para empezar a ser investigador es el tiempo también de tener hijos y de casarse y de formar un hogar.
That won't change. And absolutely, women should have it all. They should have families and they should be great scientists.
Science has always been my passion. I think from a little girl, I just love nature.
I love the research. I love the field biology. I love every aspect of my job.
I cannot imagine life without science.
This has nothing to do with the things that I dreamed of as a kid, but it's better.
The grand challenge of the European Union 2020 strategy, it has energy, climate change, aging and health, have a strong gender dimension, which, if ignored, can result in missed opportunity for innovation in research and development of markets. Not including gender perspective in addressing the core EU 2020 themes means that change for increasing the broad acceptance of new technology within Europe will be lost. Without strengthening the inclusion of women and integrating the gender dimension within the Innovation Union, its aim to deliver high level of employment, productivity and social cohesion and to strengthen European knowledge base are simply not achievable. Ignoring how sex and gender bias limit creativity and diminish excellence in research will create barriers to the full realization of the benefits that society expects from its investment in science and engineering. 30 years of research have revealed that sex and gender bias can be socially harmful and expensive. So let's make another example of another project whose name is Gender-Ed Innovation. Among the innovation in the field of gender, the project mentioned, for example, the case of a pregnant mannequin computer simulated for testing of motor vehicle accidents, which provides the information needed to create a model for the effects of impact at high speed on a fetus and design adequate safety belts. An example of application of a technology that introduced the gender dimensions in a scientific prototype. This project shows that innovation, educational research are key components of the Europe 2020 strategy, which aims to boost the European Union economy over the next decade. In the changing world, the European Union aims to become smart, sustainable, and inclusive. Among the milestones set out in the Meta-European Research Era shows the following. We will know that ERA is the shared responsibility between science, policy, and society. When we see in 2030, half of the scientists and research policymakers across the disciplines and science at all levels of system are women.
We're now coming to our second case study, and that relates to gender and the media. And as I was saying, we're specifically looking at the leadership position of men and women in the media sector as a way of thinking in terms of the challenges ahead if we are to address decision-making and the different roles of decision-making of women and men. And I would like to start by quoting a document by the European Commission that states, in relation to all forms of inequality and sex-based discrimination in employment in the media sector, media enterprises should, as any other employer, participate actively in positive action programs on gender equality at work, as well as adopt various strategies and implement best practices. Within the scope of such a positive action plan, women should be actively promoted into senior positions in media companies. In the same vein, as we've seen that many of the reports focusing and the debates focusing on the crisis did not really address the gender issue, none of the reports and analysis and investigation on the European crisis have made specific mention to the role that the media, such a crucial and strategic sector to address societal transformation and therefore the economic and financial crisis, the media are not mentioned. The media are not considered very often as stakeholders in redressing a very critical situation. Now, this is why looking at the media sector is actually very relevant. And this has been done through a study that we conducted on behalf of the European Institute for Gender Equality over the course of 2012 and 2013, particularly looking at the numbers of women and men in leadership positions in 99 media organizations across Europe. We've also been looking at policy provisions and measures and programs that have been adopted by media organizations, and we've been looking at some of the good practices. We've been doing interviews with senior women officers operating within that sector. So, as Lorenza was saying for gender and science, in the case of gender and the media, women and the media, we do have a long history of studies and evidence. We do have data, we have numbers, we have the evidence, and the evidence is showing that the situation is still very critical. So if we are to address the situation, we should be starting actually from the numbers. The slide you see here on the side is actually telling us how many women and men are occupied in leadership and decision-making position in the media organizations that have been looked at. The data shows that overall, in the selected organization, across all management levels, women constitute around 1/3 of senior staff placed in decision-making position, which is consistent with most of the findings from different sectors. But if the figure is disaggregated into its parts, it is clear that at the most senior strategic level, such as Chief Executive Officer, women comprise a mere 16% of such positions as an average, and the most senior operational roles, Chief Operating Officers, women comprise a slightly higher portion of 21%. So the numbers are not very encouraging, and if we are to promote more women in decision-making position, we should be wondering what are the right policies and practices to be adopted. That is one of the reasons we have also been looking at the policy provisions adopted by these very organizations and some of the measures. And here what we see is that just over half of the organizations surveyed have any kind of equality, diversity, or gender equality policy in place, but fewer than 1 in 7 have an explicit gender equality policy. Most of the organizations in the survey adopt the general spirit of the European Audiovisual Media Service Directive, which is essentially passive and does not move beyond a general commitment to gender equality to actually devising plans for action. Even more so if we look at monitoring mechanisms, which we know are very, very relevant in order to implement and guarantee that what is provided by the documents and formal commitment that have been made is actually brought into reality. We see that very few organizations have formal mechanism of monitoring, assessing, looking at how these policies are actually taken into consideration within the organization. And a very similar critical comment could be made as far as gender equality measures, as you can see again from the slide. Where media organizations do have measures in place, they're more likely to be designed to protect staff from sex-based discrimination, as in the case of sexual harassment, than to adopt proactive measures to support and develop women's career, such as training, trainee positions opening, and therefore there is a lot that can be done to improve the situation. So if we're looking at the basic findings in the media sector, we see something which is actually happening in very different other sectors as well. And these are the realities that should be included in any kind of anti-crisis program to be developed in the near future. On the one side, horizontal and vertical segregation, the glass ceiling effect, constraints to career improvement. That is certainly something that we still witness. A domination of a male culture in many sectors, including the media, including science, in technology, in ICTs. So in some of the sectors which are so crucial for innovation in the Europe that we want to see for 2020. Rarely normative standards that have been adopted at the international level are then translated into provisions and policy measures both at the national level and at the side of media organization. And even when these policies are actually adopted by media organization, what the evidence is showing is that policy is not enough. The formal commitment is not enough. So it is very much a kind of cultural change which is needed, and therefore educational programs, training programs should be adopted, starting not only at the professional level, but starting from the sector of education, beginning with the education of communication studies, and the analysis of policies and public policy.
So to conclude, we can ask ourselves, what happened if we do nothing? If we do nothing, this is what can happen. Danger of flawed research or diminished relevance of result, as well as less diversity in media and communication. Missing innovation and market opportunities. Unfulfilled use of human capital, women scientists and women communicators, in a competitive global research and information economy. Increase social distrust of and reduce support for science and its institution as well as media system. The crisis may well be an opportunity, but clear gendered vision must emerge and policies and programs must be designed and implemented, based on existing evidence and informed by the voices and perspective of many stakeholders involved in gender-aware social transformations.
So yes, the crisis may be an opportunity, but the opportunity does not only depend on the vision and the policy intervention, it does not depend on the different stakeholders alone. It depends very much on us. And it also depends on how you will be considering all this and keeping this in mind and be aware of these gender differences and gender challenges when you will be working in Europe, when you will be exercising your rights as a European citizen, and when you will be voting at the upcoming parliamentary election. To conclude today, we certainly invite you to go and look at the materials on the website, the Next Generation Global Studies website. We certainly invite you to look at the many sites and places where European institutions and many of the European organizations are making fundamental resources, knowledge resources accessible. We also invite you to contact not-for-profit organizations that are working nearby in your cities, in your regions, operating to promote gender equality, and learn from them, from their practices. What are the actual good practices that we can develop together? Finally, of course, you can write your comment on the Sharing Perspective website, and we look forward to hear from you on your own take-up on the gender dimension in Europe.